There's something unsettling about being home alone. The silence, the creaking of the house, the feeling that someone, or something, is watching. Maybe it's just your imagination. Or maybe you're not alone at all. Tonight, as the rain taps against your window, settle in for 3 chilling, true Home Alone horror stories. But be warned, after these, you might never feel safe in your own home again. The Man in the Attic, a terrifying Home Alone horror story. Chapter 1. The Rainy Night. And the first signs, opening hook, suspenseful introduction. Emily had always found comfort in the sound of rain. The gentle patter against her bedroom window, the cool breeze seeping through the small cracks. It all made her feel safe. She curled up in bed, scrolling through her phone, enjoying the cozy atmosphere of her dimly lit apartment. But on this particular night, something felt off. At first, it was just a feeling, a strange unease creeping up her spine. Then she heard it, a soft creak. She paused, holding her breath. Houses made noise, especially in the rain. Pipes contracted, wood shifted. It was normal. Then came another sound, a faint, deliberate scrape, like someone moving above her. Emily sat up in bed, her heart thudding in her chest. She lived alone, and her attic was supposed to be empty. Chapter 2. The Growing. Fear Emily tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a squirrel, or some other small animal that had somehow found its way into the attic. Maybe the wind had shifted something. But deep down, she knew. The sound was too heavy, too intentional. She reached for her phone and quickly texted, "Her best friend, Jake. Will Emily, I think someone's in my attic." "Jake, are you serious? Call the cops." Emily hesitated. What if it was nothing? What if she called the police for no reason and embarrassed herself? Then, another noise, a slow, deliberate thump. Her pulse spiked. Someone, or something, was up there. Clutching a flashlight, she tiptoed toward the hallway. The attic hatch was in the ceiling above her. She swallowed hard, staring up at it. The house fell silent again. Maybe she was imagining things. But then she saw it, a thin trail of dust drifting down from the attic door. Something was moving up there. Chapter 3. The Discovery. Her instincts screamed at her to run, to leave the house immediately. But fear had her rooted in place. She had to know what was up there. With trembling fingers, she reached for the pull cord and tugged. The attic hatch creaked open. Silence. She slowly climbed the ladder, her flashlight trembling in her grip. As she peeked inside, the beam of light swept across the attic. Dusty boxes, old furniture, cobwebbed corners. And then she saw it, a sleeping bag, a crumpled water bottle, a half-eaten sandwich. Someone had been living in her attic. Her breath caught in her throat. How long had they been up here? And more importantly, were they still here? Chapter 4. The attack. Before she could react, a shadow lurched from the darkness. A hand shot out, grabbing her ankle. Emily screamed, kicking wildly, trying to free herself. The flashlight tumbled from her grip, crashing to the floor below. The attic hatch shook as she thrashed, her attacker gripping her leg tightly. She couldn't see their face, only the raw strength of their grip, the sheer terror of the moment. With all her might, she twisted and kicked as hard as she could. The hand let go. She fell back, plummeting down the ladder and crashing onto the hardwood floor. Pain shot through her body, but adrenaline pushed her forward. She scrambled to her feet and bolted for the door, grabbing her phone on the way out. With shaking hands, she dialed 911. Her breath came in gasps. She turned back to look at the attic hatch. It was closed. Had they shut it behind them? Or worse, were they still up there, watching her? Chapter 5. The search. The police arrived in minutes. 2 officers entered the house, guns drawn, while Emily stood outside in the rain, hugging herself tightly. She watched as they pulled down the attic hatch and climbed up. For what felt like an eternity, nothing happened. Then, "Clear!" one of the officers called out. Emily blinked. No one was there. She was sure she had been grabbed. But the police found no sign of an intruder, only the makeshift bedding, the scattered food wrappers, and an empty space where someone had been. He must have escaped, one officer said. But how? The attic had no exit, unless he was never meant to be caught. Chapter 6. The aftermath. Emily was shaken, but the police assured her they would patrol the area. She changed the locks, reinforced the attic hatch, and even installed a security camera. For days, she barely slept. Every sound made her jump. One evening, as she reviewed the footage, her stomach twisted into knots. There, at 3:17 a.m., her bedroom door slowly opened. A tall, shadowy figure stepped out from inside her room. He had been hiding in her closet the whole time. Emily covered her, mouth bile rising in her throat. The figure walked past the camera toward the attic hatch. Then, he vanished. The attic had been his hideout, but not his only one. Chapter 7. The realization, climax, the final horror. That night, Emily couldn't breathe. The thought of him standing in her room watching her sleep made her sick. She packed a bag. She couldn't stay here anymore. Just as she was about to leave, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. You should have never gone up there. Her blood ran cold. Then, a knock on the window. She turned slowly. Outside, barely visible in the rain, stood a figure, a man, smiling. She screamed, grabbed her keys, and ran. She never came back to that house, and no one ever found out who he was or how long he had been watching her. The end. This script includes a terrifying hook, immediate suspense, gradual horror build-up, psychological and physical tension, a horrifying climax, the real horror was closer than she thought. Would you like me to make any changes or expand any sections? Let me know. The uninvited guest, a terrifying home alone. Horror story. Chapter 1. The rainy night and the strange noise. Opening hook. Suspenseful introduction. The wind howled outside, making the windows rattle ever so slightly. The rhythmic drumming of the rain against the roof should have been comforting, but tonight it felt different. David sat alone in his dimly lit living room, a half-finished beer on the coffee table and a true crime documentary playing on the TV. His wife Lisa was out of town for the weekend, and while he enjoyed the peace, the silence in the house felt heavier than usual. He glanced at the clock. 2:47 a.m. Just as he was about to turn off the TV and head to bed, he heard it, a faint clicking sound. His ears perked up. The sound came from the front door, and then the unmistakable sound of a lock turning. David's stomach dropped. He had locked the door, hadn't he? Chapter 2. The shadow in the doorway. David's breath caught in his throat. He sat frozen, ears straining against the rain to confirm what he had just heard. Click. Creak. His heart pounded. His front door was opening. He grabbed his phone and pulled up the security camera feed. The screen flickered for a moment, then showed the grainy footage of his front porch. His front door was wide open, and standing just inside, completely motionless, was a tall figure. David's hands trembled as he adjusted the angle, trying to see the intruder's face. But the man was just standing there. No movement, no rush to enter the house. Just standing, watching. Chapter 3. The unwelcome presence. David's throat went dry. He reached for the baseball bat beside his couch, his mind racing. Was this some kind of sick joke? A break-in? Had he left the door unlocked? No. He distinctly remembered turning the key before heading upstairs earlier. The figure took a step forward, then another. David's heart pounded as he clenched the bat tighter. The man moved further into the house out of the camera's view. David's phone vibrated in his hand. A text from Lisa. Lisa. Hey babe, just checking in. Everything okay? David's fingers hovered over the keyboard, unsure of what to type. His gut told him to call the police, but a terrifying thought entered his mind. What if the intruder wasn't alone? What if, while he called for help, something was already creeping up the stairs? He turned his phone's flashlight on and moved cautiously toward the staircase. Then, he stopped dead in his tracks. At the bottom of the stairs, the man was standing there, wearing David's clothes. Chapter 4. The Man Who Shouldn't Be There. Realization sent a wave of nausea through him. This wasn't just a break-in. This wasn't a random act of crime. Someone had been living in his house. The man's face was partially hidden in the shadows, but David could see a sickly grin forming on his lips. Then, in the softest, eeriest voice, the man whispered, "You shouldn't. Leave your doors unlocked." David's grip on the bat tightened. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. The intruder took a step forward. David swung the bat with everything he had, but the man was fast. He ducked, lunging at David with unnatural speed. They collided. David felt himself being shoved backward, the two of them crashing into the staircase railing. The bat slipped from his grip as they struggled, the man's fingers tightening around David's throat. David gasped, his vision swimming. With all his strength, he managed to twist his body and shove the man backward. The intruder stumbled. That was David's chance. He lunged for the bat, and this time, when he swung, he didn't miss. Chapter 5. The aftermath. The bat connected with a sickening thud. The intruder's head snapped to the side, and he crumpled to the floor. David didn't hesitate. He grabbed his phone and ran outside, his bare feet slapping against the wet pavement as he dialed 911. "Someone broke into my house," he gasped. I think I knocked him out, but he had a key." A key? The words sent a fresh wave of terror through him. How did this stranger have a key to his house? Had Lisa given it to someone? Had he lost a spare somewhere? He turned to look at his house, expecting the man to be lying motionless on the floor. But the hallway was empty. The front door was open again, and the man was gone. Chapter 6. The Investigation. The police arrived within minutes, combing through every inch of the house. They found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no broken windows, only an empty sleeping bag in the attic, along with a pile of David's missing clothes. Someone had been living inside his house for weeks. The officers dusted for fingerprints, but the results were inconclusive. The man had vanished. Even more disturbing, there was no sign of how he got in. No missing spare keys, no forced locks. David's security camera footage had been wiped. But then, the lead detective showed him something that made his blood run cold. The back of the front door, taped neatly at eye level, was a note. It was written in David's own handwriting. "You shouldn't leave your doors unlocked." Chapter 7. The Truth No One Wants to Hear. Climax. The final horror. David moved out of that house within a week. The authorities never found the man. To this day, he has no idea how the intruder got in or how long he had been watching him. But sometimes, when David wakes up in the middle of the night, he swears he can hear something, a soft creak, a whisper of movement, and when he looks toward his bedroom door, sometimes it's slightly open. The end. This script includes a terrifying hook, immediate suspense, gradual horror buildup, psychological and physical tension, a horrifying climax, The real horror was closer than he thought. Would you like any modifications? Maybe an extended ending or a twist? Let me know. The Whispering Shadow, a Babysitter's Worst Nightmare. Chapter 1. The Stormy Night and the First Whisper, Opening Hook, Suspenseful Introduction. The storm raged outside, rattling the windows of the old Johnson house. Lightning flashed, illuminating the large living room for a brief second before plunging it back into flickering darkness. Samantha glanced at the clock. 9:45 p.m. The kids were already asleep upstairs. The house, though aged and creaky, had been peaceful all night. She curled up on the couch, scrolling through her phone, the glow from the screen casting eerie shadows on the walls. Rain pattered against the glass, a steady rhythm that should have been soothing. But then, she heard it. A whisper. Faint. Almost. Too soft to be real. Her fingers froze mid-scroll. It wasn't coming from the TV, not from her phone. It was coming from inside the house. A shiver ran down her spine. Maybe it was just the wind howling through the old vents? Or her imagination playing tricks? Then she heard it again, a low, breathy whisper. Come upstairs. Her stomach turned to ice. The kids were asleep. No one else was home. Chapter 2. The Shadow. At the top of the stairs, Samantha's breathing became shallow. Every horror story she had ever heard suddenly seemed all too real. She turned her phone's flashlight on, the dim glow barely cutting through the darkness. Was someone in the house? Steeling herself, she stood up and tiptoed toward the staircase. Each step on the wooden floor creaked under her weight, making her flinch. As she reached the bottom of the stairs, she hesitated. The hallway above was swallowed in darkness. Then, a shadow moved. Samantha's heart nearly stopped. At the top of the landing stood a tall, thin figure, barely visible in the dim light, watching her. She couldn't see its face, couldn't even tell if it was a person or just her mind playing tricks. But deep down, she knew. Something was there. A floorboard groaned under the figure's weight. Samantha turned and ran. Chapter 3. The laughter in the dark, her feet pounded against the floor as she sprinted toward the front door. Behind her, the whispering turned into rasping laughter. Her fingers fumbled with the lock. The doorknob felt ice cold under her grip. Come on. A sudden bang echoed behind her. Something had moved, closer. Finally, the lock clicked. She yanked the door open and ran barefoot into the stormy night. The freezing rain soaking her instantly. She didn't look back, didn't want to see whatever had been standing at the top of the stairs. Samantha ran to the neighbors, pounding on their door, screaming for help. Lights flicked on inside. Mr. and Mrs. Carson, the elderly couple next door, opened the door with wide, startled eyes. "What's wrong, dear?" Mrs. Carson gasped. Samantha, shivering and breathless, turned to point at the Johnson house. The upstairs window was open. A dark silhouette was staring down at her. Then, it vanished. Chapter 4. The police search. The sirens blared through the rain, flashing blue and red lights reflecting off the wet pavement. 3 officers arrived, guns drawn, moving cautiously into the Johnson house. Samantha watched from the Carsons' front porch, wrapped in a blanket, heart still, hammering. Minutes passed, then 15, then 30. Finally, one of the officers came back outside. "There's no one inside," he said, shaking his head. Samantha's mouth went dry. "No," she whispered. "I saw someone. The whisper. I heard it. It was real." The officer exchanged glances with his partner. "No signs of forced entry," he added. "Doors and windows were locked when we arrived. Are you sure?" And then his radio crackled. A voice on the other end, urgent. "Sir, you might want to check the security footage." Chapter 5. The footage that shouldn't exist, Samantha, the officers, and the Johnsons, who had rushed home after the call, huddled around the security monitor in the living room. The footage played back. At 2:57 a.m., nothing. At 2:58 a.m., nothing. At 2:59 a.m., the screen flickered, and then a figure appeared at the top of the stairs. Tall, thin, motionless. It stood there, just watching. Then the camera picked up the whisper. "Come upstairs." Samantha's blood ran cold. That was it. That was the exact voice she had heard. The officers exchanged uneasy looks. The Johnsons paled. And then, the figure moved. Right before the police arrived, it stepped backward into the darkness and vanished. Chapter 6. The Discovery in the Attic. The officers, now visibly unsettled, decided to do one final sweep of the house, and that's when they found it. Up in the attic, hidden behind an old wooden panel, a small makeshift sleeping area, a tattered blanket, a few empty food wrappers, and worst of all, Samantha's name scribbled over and over on the wall. Next to it, in the same jagged handwriting, "Come upstairs." Chapter 7. Are You Ever? Truly alone? Climax, the final horror. The Johnsons never stayed in that house again. They moved within a week. Samantha, shaken to her core, refused to babysit again. The footage was sent to experts for analysis. The conclusion? The figure wasn't human. The whisper was untraceable. No evidence of an actual voice. No signs of a real intruder. Just something else. And here's the most terrifying part. The security cameras continued recording, even after the family moved out, and every night, at exactly 3 a.m., the same whisper could be heard in the empty house. A single, chilling phrase. "Come. Upstairs. The end." This script includes a suspenseful hook, instant horror, a terrifying build-up, psychological and supernatural horror, a horrifying climax, something beyond explanation. Would you like any modifications or an alternate ending? Let me know.